All right, everybody. It says I'm live, and as usual, I'm asking for your help to let me know if that's actually true. Otherwise, welcome to another Monday night where I know we've had a little bit of a break, which I definitely needed. And thank you all for being here anyway and showing back up, even though it's been a couple weeks now. So I really appreciate the support, and I appreciate all of you showing up here to try to get this information and hopefully sharing it with other people that might need to be aware of just how close we are to some of these world-changing events, which is the best way to describe them at this point in time. So 5x5s are coming through. I see we have 5x5s from Harbor Prepper, William Pence, Exile Reviews, good to see you. Thank you for modding. We also have Old Man Bones showing up. James Prophet says it's showtime, and I agree. And of course, Sherman Sales says FBI by gay. So I don't know exactly how that refers to how I look and sound, but I have ideas as to exactly what you mean. So here we are. We got Fish and Golf 2, 5x5 as well. Things are going in the right direction. Now, before we get started tonight, real quick story, just because I like to kind of keep everyone aware as to what's going on when it comes to some of this. Hold on, let's move the microphone just a little bit here. There we go. Hopefully it sounds even better now. Let me know if that's the case. But because we're in a fifth generation warfare type scenario, it's good to keep everyone aware of what's happening here on the home front as well before we dive into some of the other topics we're discussing tonight. And of course, this is an example of cyber attacks where we have a long-term situation occurring in Wichita, Kansas. So Wichita says most systems back online following cyber attack. This is from today. Be aware this cyber attack happened almost 3 weeks ago. So it's taken 3 weeks for Wichita, Kansas to get some of their public systems back online and functional after a cyber attack, okay? The city of Wichita says recovery efforts following the recent cyber attack are progressing well and that most public-facing systems are back in service with some limited exceptions. Water metering, billing, and payment processing systems are coming back online, the city said in a release on Monday. Customers should expect to begin receiving updated statements this week. Auto payments are functioning as normal, and customers should now have access to their utility accounts online. So be aware that in Wichita, we had a cyber attack that took 3 weeks to recover from, where people's utility accounts were affected. And just imagine this on a more nationwide scale where people aren't able to access their utilities, pay their bills, and of course after a certain amount of time those bills rack up, and then when they do come back online they still expect you to pay the full amount. Luckily for you, there will be payment arrangements available, but just think about how this could affect a large portion of the population if everybody suddenly had a $300 or $400 water bill due to a cyber attack occurring, or didn't have access to their utilities at all and had no idea as to where they stood when it came to paying their bills or even having access to utilities in general. So this is just a reminder that this stuff is happening. These things are occurring. This affected their airport, their municipal court, their library. It affected everything in Wichita, basically, when it came to public-facing municipalities. So be aware of that. And of course, I want to thank Midway USA for making live streams like this possible. I got to go to the facility while I was on my trip, which I did take a nice vacation. I'm not going to lie. It was definitely needed, but I got to meet Adam and Neil over at Midway USA, a really good tour of their distribution facility, and the amount of automation that they have in their facility is extremely impressive. So I really liked being able to see it for myself and understand just how much effort they put into making sure their customers are taken care of, which helped reinforce my support and partnership with them as a company. So a big thanks to Midway USA. And of course, the live streams are sponsored by MagicPepperBeef.com. If you want to get long-term 10-year minimum shelf life, but honestly 25-year shelf-stable beef, you can get it from MagicPepperBeef.com. I will put it in the live chat right now in case you're looking for that link. And of course, it's in the description as well as in the pinned comment. But if you use code MAGICPrepper, you get 15% off. This stuff is expensive, but it's also high quality, and it's a good way to have New York strip, filet mignon, ribeye, whatever you might want to have during an SHTF type scenario. And it'd be excellent for barter, but even better for just being a bougie warlord. So big thanks to MagicPepperBeef.com. Make sure you guys check that out if you're interested. So let's get started with the meat and potatoes of the discussion tonight, okay? Howdy to you as well, Dustin Pribble, Dapper Dingo, happy mega MAGA freedom-loving Patriots Monday. I almost couldn't say that one fully. So, Luke B, Magic Prepper, Italian sausage win. I'm not sure, but I will definitely put in a request because I understand the importance of the spicy meatball. So, let's see here. Tactical Matt Foley had a New York strip just about an hour ago. Thank you for rubbing that in our face. You know, I would have liked one as well, but I wasn't invited. let's talk about what Germany's up to, okay? So tonight, just so we're all on the same page, and of course, if you're on replay crew, make sure you check in the comments, and I appreciate you all for always coming back and getting this information. It's valuable, or at least I hope it is, because I'm trying to help share my thoughts with all of you, and then hopefully we're on the same page, right? So tonight we're talking about German war plans, the automatic U.S. draft registration, which was just introduced into Congress, which we'll talk about here shortly. And then we also have the Russian subs in the Caribbean, as well as the nitrocellulose shortage, right? So, because cellulose is something else. Let's not talk about it. But anyway, we're going to start with the German war plans, okay? Zach Maruda, good to see you. Very good to see you, okay? So, Germany has updated its wartime doctrine to move things forward in case of a potential conflict with Russia. Now, this is being reported by CNN, but of course you can get this information from other outlets and everything else. We go all over the place on this channel because it's good to get different perspectives. There's not as much of a political bias on this one, and here is something interesting for you. I did translate the actual document, and I will have a link for that here for you in just a minute, but first let's talk about it, okay? Mandatory conscription and subway stations as bunkers. Germany outlines wartime plans, okay? Now, this is from yesterday, June 9th. Conscription, rationing, and subway stations turned into bunkers. For the first time since the Cold War, Germany has updated its plans should conflict erupt in Europe, with ministers citing the threat posed by Russia. The 67-page document, known as the Framework Directive for Overall Defense, and released this week, envisions the complete transformation of daily life for German citizens in the event of war. Now, I might make a standalone video about this specific topic. And the reason behind that is because this is a very interesting concept and perspective about how the average citizen should envision their life during a wartime scenario. And I don't think that this would be only applicable to Germany. This would be applicable to any other country in the world that might find itself in all-out conflict with a major superpower. And so by studying what Germany's considering here, we can get an idea as to what the U.S. might be considering as well when it comes to the way we're treated here. So that's why I think it might deserve its own standalone video. Not to mention the document is 67 pages long, which means there's a lot of information there. It's a further sign of how Germany, which has had a staunchly anti-militaristic stance since World War II, has been forced to adapt its security and military policy in the wake of Moscow's war on Ukraine. Under wartime conditions, mandatory conscription into the army would be reinstated, and skilled laborers over 18 could be made to work certain jobs, including in bakeries and post offices, as well as being prevented from quitting their jobs. Doctors, psychologists, nurses, and vets may also be repurposed in military and civil service roles. Rationing would also be brought in. In the event of dwindling food supplies, the government would stockpile food to provide citizens with one hot meal a day for an undisclosed period of time. According to the document, federal reserves would include foods like rice, pulses, and condensed milk. And of course, in case you're not aware, pulses is basically beans, okay? So rice and beans, they're on top of that. Hopefully you are as well. Other key resources such as petrol and oil could also be rationed with coupons if they became scarce. It also outlines civil protection measures, including transforming underground stations into makeshift bunkers and preparing hospitals for an influx of patients. Unveiling the plans, German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser said it was necessary for her country to arm itself better in the face of Russian aggression. The Russian aggression has completely changed the security situation in Europe, first and foremost among our Eastern European and NATO partners, such as in the Baltic states, but also due to hybrid threats such as cyber attacks, espionage, and disinformation here, she said. Okay? Now, this is a very interesting thing that they are doing. And of course, this whole ready for war thing by 2029, it's something that's been talked about quite a bit over the last couple of years. One thing I think is interesting about that particular year is the idea that it's after the potential 4-year term of the next president. So I guess there could be some reason to believe why they might think that might be the best time for these things to actually occur. I don't know. You tell me, but that's just some of my thought process. But what I will say is that we are entering a strange period of time where Germany is starting to talk about, mandatory conscription and turning subways into bunkers and forcing people to work in bakeries and not allowing them to quit their jobs. Like, not allowing you to quit your job should be something you should consider as a possibility during a wartime scenario, especially according to the way Germany thinks it's going to operate. Now, this document, like I said, is only available in German, and I used Google to translate it into English. So here we have the Framework Guidelines for Overall Defense Guidelines, RRGV, right? Now this is all translated into English. And one thing I just want to share with you here, because it's 67 pages long, is let's go to page 43. Just to give you an idea of what's in this article and why, or a document, and why I think it might be worth taking a look at. And like I said, why it might be worth a standalone video. Page 43, section 22.3, ensuring water supply. So this can apply to you as well as an individual. It doesn't have to apply to an entire country for it to be relevant. It is essential to ensure that the civilian population and the armed forces are supplied with water, even in the event of an external emergency. The federal government is examining whether the Water Security Act and the legal regulations and administrative provisions issued on its basis may need to be amended. In the event that the existing water supply systems are affected or fail due to damage events in an external emergency, an adequate emergency water supply must be ensured. This emergency supply must focus on covering the vital need for drinking water. Because of the large amount of time required, the precautionary measures must be planned and implemented during peacetime, just like we talk about here in the preparedness community. While times are good is when you should be getting ready for these things. On the basis of appropriate planning, owners of water supply systems and municipalities can be obliged to take precautionary measures in accordance with the Water Security Act by means of a notice of obligation from the responsible authorities. These include, in particular, hardening measures by modernizing systems, creating redundancies, purchasing mobile components or additional equipment to maintain the piped supply. Now, this is an interesting part right here as well. Maintenance, or if there is a legitimate interest, construction of emergency wells as redundancy for the piped supply. So, emergency wells is something that you should consider as part of a wartime preparedness scenario that your local municipality might have to investigate or might have to implement. And why I'm bringing that up is because if you have ideas of getting a well drilled or trying to provide yourself with your own water source that's not affected by some kind of local municipality, then you might want to make those plans before the government has every single water well drilling company out and about drilling wells for every other reason besides for your residents, right? So these are things to keep in mind. But if they are coming up with these ideas now and saying that these precautionary measures have to be taken in peacetime, then you should definitely be considering your water scenario maybe more seriously than you even have before, okay? Now, like I said, this has 66 other pages of information in it, all related to similar items. So if you want to read this in English, because it's hard to find that way, and it was hard to translate too, I'm not sure why, but things were acting up in one capacity or another. If you go to magicprepper.com, I actually set it up so that it's on the main page of my website. And if you just scroll down right on the front page, it's right here. You can download the PDF right from my website for free, no charge or anything like that. Or you can actually just look at the PDF right here on the website by just clicking these tabs that say next and previous, and it'll take you through all the pages. So just go to magicprepper.com. I've got it right there for you. It's free, and I just thought it's worth looking at in order to get some better information about how an entire government is planning on handling this wartime scenario for its population and how you can apply some of that to your plans as well. Okay, so let's see here. German is an English word, kids, says Luke B. Yep. Let's see. Code infantry, says Florida Sheepdog 1. Equality, says Desert 1776. And then let's see here. I'm trying to see if I missed anything else earlier here in the chat. What's different from FEMA's plan? Well, there's a lot of interesting things in there based on the fact that they are a lot more proximal to a open war front right now. So it's something that might have more of a future concept than what you're currently being provided with by FEMA. So that's why I would look into it, and just because everyone has different doctrines and different perspectives, and so looking at what Germany is trying to do might give you some ideas that maybe the U.S. isn't going to do, right? So that's where that's at, in case you're interested. Now, what else is going on? Well, we have automatic U.S. draft registration being proposed in the House. Now, this usually wouldn't be like a huge deal except for the proximity to a World War III type scenario that we're currently in, and the fact that the idea of the draft being reinstated has been a hot topic for quite some time now. And here we are where we have congressmen putting in a request basically to create an automatic registration system to make sure they get as many able-bodied men registered for the draft Timing is everything. Coincidences don't exist anymore. And this is why I wanted to bring this to your attention, because to me, this looks like a precursor of a possible draft scenario, right? So U.S. House Committee proposes automatic sign-up for military draft. This is produced or published on June 4th, okay? During markup of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2025, the U.S. House Armed Services Committee approved an amendment to the NDAA on May 22nd that would automatically register all draft-age male U.S. residents with the Selective Service System for a possible military draft based on information from other federal databases. A video of this action in the House can be viewed here. The system of automatic draft registration will replace the system in effect since 1980, in which young men can decide for themselves whether or not to sign up for the draft. So many choose not to register that the Selective Service database would be useless for an actual draft. Okay, so what I'm going to do here really quick is actually play a clip of that video so that you all can see how this works, okay? Or not how it works, but what it is they're proposing, and the fact that it looks like it's moving forward because it is within the NDAA, which means there's a good chance that it's just going to maintain that status, okay? And then real quick, I did miss some super chats earlier tonight. So let's see here. We've got Nick, thoughts on Saudi Arabia's decision not to renew its 50-year petrodollar deal with the United States. We're going to talk about that later tonight. MP, can you repeat everything you said? I just came in. Law of the minimum. I will repeat other things for you at some point, I'm sure, because I'm a repetitive type guy, all right? And then let's see. We also missed Nick talking about it. Once again, thank you for the super chats. Definitely not a requirement, but I do appreciate them. They definitely support the channel. And I will be talking about the petrodollar towards the end of tonight's chat, in case that's something you're interested in. We're still talking about Russian subs in Cuba. We're still talking about the escalations coming from Russia. That's all on the table. But really quick, I want to talk about this. Draft will be the last thing on the list compared to retain, active duty, reserves, retirees, then draft. That's probably true, Just Jay. You're not wrong. But at least this gives people an idea of where we stand when it comes to what the government's plans are moving forward. And the fact that a draft is becoming more likely, in my opinion, because they're putting these measures into place now, from what I would assume is in preparation for the possibility of needing to enact it. So real quick, let's just play this clip so everyone can kind of see what's going on here, okay?
We will now consider.
Can you hear the audio of this clip?
Log
That's something I
number
need to know.
4555 by Ms. Houlihan. For what purpose does the gentlewoman seek recognition?
Let me know in the chat if you can hear the audio.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment without objection? The reading of the amendment is dispensed with.
Barbara
The
Prepper
chair
says yes.
recognizes
Okay,
the gentlewoman
great.
for the purpose of explaining her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment very simply would make selective service registration automatic rather than requiring men to proactively register with the selective service system. So this amendment would purely cut the government red tape that exists and allow an important government office to be more efficient and to save money for more American taxpayers. So here are some facts. Registration rates continue to decline despite targeted and very aggressive educational campaigns by the Social Security Administration, amongst others. Here are the reasons. FAFSA has removed this requirement from their form, and this previously accounted for approximately 25% of all registrations. There has also been a generational reduction in students who apply for driver's licenses in this country. 40 states, including Washington, D.C., and 4 U.S. territories allow for registration when obtaining a driver's license. But Gen Z, as an example, only now makes up 12% of U.S. licensed drivers, which is a significant decline from previous generations driving. This amendment would also automatically trigger that all men ages 18 through 26 would be placed for selective service, and it will remove the requirement for young men to present themselves for that registration. It will ensure that individuals are registered and thus also not subject to the penalties that exist for a failure to register. So penalties for failing to register include such things as being ineligible for federal employment, for state and local employment in most states, and for state-based student aids in most states, and much more. By using available databases, the agency will be able to register all of the individuals required to be registered and thus help ensure that any future military draft is fair and is equitable. This will also allow us to rededicate resources, which basically means money, towards readiness and towards mobilization planning, as well as towards cybersecurity, rather than towards education and advertising campaigns driven to register people. I would please ask that you all favorably consider this resolution and this amendment, and I yield back.
Chair wholeheartedly endorses this amendment. It is long overdue. We live in a technological society. the Selective Service already captures this number of people, and this waste of money requiring them to check in is just purely that, a waste of money. So I wholeheartedly urge members to support the gentlelady's amendment. Any further?
Okay, so wholeheartedly supports it. Just so you're aware, no pushback or anything like that. Automatic draft registration. Look, you're supposed to register. I'm registered. I understand how this all works and everything else. But all I'm trying to say is that this, to me, is an indicator of future plans, right? They're assuming they're going to need to use the Selective Service at some point in time here in the future. So they need to make sure as many people are registered as possible. And in this day and age, there's no reason not to use, AI and everything else they have access to automatically register as many Americans as humanly possible. So Hunt Outdoors, yes, they are only looking for men for that purpose at this time based on the current regulations regarding the Selective Service and everything else. I'm sure that could change at any other moment, but it's just a reminder that, at least in my opinion, things are getting hot, right? So let's go ahead and talk about why things are getting hot, right? So, and USMC Devil Dog, good to see you. Glad you're here. Thank you for modding. I know Exile Reviews is here as well. It's always good to see the blue wrenches in the chat. I appreciate you all helping out. So, what's the elephant in the room? Well, it's a bear, actually. We have all this escalation coming from Russia. So, look, I took a couple weeks off. We're back, right? We're live. And a lot has happened. But all it really has done for me is reinforce the fact that we are headed towards some level of global conflict. And that will affect us in our daily lives, which not every large-scale worldwide event affects us directly, but this one will if things keep going in the direction they're currently going in. So Putin warns West over Ukraine armaments and nuclear arsenal. Now, this all came out just recently. A lot of interesting dialogue was had when there was an interview with Putin from Russia. And let's talk about some of it because it is inflammatory and it is concerning when it comes to how things are being thought about right now in the media and from the people in the East, okay? Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that his country would not rule out using nuclear weapons if its sovereignty or territory were threatened. On Wednesday, Putin met in person with senior editors from international news agencies for the first time since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. He answered questions ranging from the threat of nuclear war to possible repercussions for countries that support Ukraine's efforts to launch attacks within Russian territory. When asked about the prospect of using Russia's nuclear arsenal, the president said it was not out of the question. For some reason, the West believes that Russia will never use it, Putin responded, pointing towards the country's 2020 nuclear doctrine. It authorizes the Russian government to consider nuclear options if a weapon of mass destruction is used against the country or if the very existence of the state is put under threat. Which, by the way, can easily be an economic threat. Don't forget that if you ruin a country economically, you're ruining them as a country and their existence is now in question. We have a nuclear doctrine. Look what it says. If someone's actions threaten our sovereignty and territorial integrity, we consider it possible for us to use all means at our disposal. This should not be taken lightly, superficially. Okay? Putin also took the opportunity once again to brush aside fears that Russia could attack countries in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You should not make Russia out to be the enemy. You're only hurting yourself with this, Putin said at the news conference. Article 5 of the treaty establishes that an attack against one country in the organization is considered an attack against all members. 1 second, my throat is dry. Voila! Putin has repeatedly dismissed the idea of launching an attack on NATO despite tensions with its member states. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told CBS News earlier this year that Putin's aggression could reach Europe, prompting a NATO response. And in April, Germany's top military leader said an attack against NATO soil could be possible in 5 to 8 years. They just have these arbitrary numbers, they make them up, but they sound good on paper. Still, Putin reiterated his stance on Wednesday. They thought that Russia wanted to attack NATO, he said. Have you gone completely crazy? That is as thick as this table. Who came up with this? It's just complete nonsense, total rubbish, okay? However, Putin also hinted at the possibility of heightened tensions and even asymmetrical military steps if Western countries like Germany and the United States were to supply Ukraine with weapons used on Russian soil, which they are doing, which is happening right now, which is why we're having this conversation before we get into the submarine stuff, all right? But keep this in mind. he's opening the door to supplying weapons to our adversaries. Who could that be? It could be anybody. It could be Iran, it could be Hezbollah, it could be Hamas, it could be any organization that has a problem with the United States. So keep that in mind, okay? It could be Mexican drug cartels for all we know. It could be China. He explained that the use of certain weapons, including the use of advanced missile technology, would be tantamount to participation in Russia's war with Ukraine. Woo! That would mark their direct involvement in the war against the Russian Federation, and we reserve the right to act the same way, he said. If they consider it possible to deliver such weapons to the combat zone to launch strikes on our territory and create problems for us, why don't we have the right to supply weapons of the same type to some regions of the world where they can be used to launch strikes on sensitive facilities of the countries that do it to Russia? That's a concerning remark. That means he's willing to open up proxy wars against us in other parts of the world. Who knows where those proxy wars spawn from, but he has the capability of arming many different militant groups with large-scale weapons that could easily hit American targets, so keep that in mind. His remarks came after Germany decided in January to supply Leopard 2A6 battle tanks to Ukraine. And last month, both Germany and the U.S. agreed to allow Ukraine to use certain missiles to hit targets inside Russia. Now, here's the thing. We have gone from, no, we won't allow you to use certain weapons, or no, we won't supply you with certain weapons, just a couple years ago, to maybe just giving them literal small arms ammunition, right? And then adding in some 155 millimeter shells, like howitzer rounds and things of that nature. And now we've gotten to the point where we're supplying them with F-16s, drones, and all kinds of other technology and missile systems that are being green-lit to be used on Russian territory. So these words aren't empty. This is legitimately how they're considering moving forward based on this war of attrition and, like it was said in the article, asymmetric warfare. So, let's see here. Luke B says hypersonics. Right. Well, everyone knows subsonics are quieter. So if they use those, it would be a lot easier to get by because no one would hear it coming. So what are they thinking, right? Let's see here. Draft all of the soys you created, says Water the Tree 76. Well, I have a feeling that that's not the droids they're looking for. They would love to have people who eat meat. So be aware of that. And then let's see here. Nick coming in with the super chats tonight. I can't even keep up. China selling off trillions of U.S. treasuries. It's worse than I thought. I know you know how bad it really is, MP, but you keep it together well. Well, yes, China has been dumping U.S. treasuries, which we talked about on a previous live stream, and I explained that my thought process there was that it was a way to divest from certain asset classes in order to avoid sanctions or possible entanglements in the future if things were to go hot between China and the U.S., right? So they want to dump those assets to maintain control over as much of their disposable or fluid, liquidable income as possible, or their cash, basically, right? So, Nick, MP, no sugarcoating. How bad do you think it will get? A lot of bad signs. I trust your opinion. I really appreciate the super chat. First off, thank you so much for that, Nick. And I not required at all. You guys can easily ask questions without doing a super chat. Just tag me, and I'll do my best to take a look for it. But my thought is that right now, my hope is that we find ourselves in a scenario of struggle and suffering, right? Strife that maybe our generation hasn't necessarily been subjected to, but hopefully not any further past the degree of something like the Great Depression, right? If that is as bad as it gets, that could be, well, easily survivable as well as something adaptable that we could then rebuild from thereafter. And that's kind of what my thought process is leaning towards at this point in time, but with a little bit more of enhanced violence, thanks to the criminal element and the cyber warfare element, not to mention the collaborator and infiltration element, of course, thanks to our southern border. So there will be an enhanced level of violence and an enhanced level of danger compared to what we saw back in like the 1930s, at least in my opinion. But then the average person's daily life might emulate that type of Great Depression scenario in a similar fashion. Not to mention the idea of a global war breaking out, so losing some of our younger generation to a draft or to a wartime scenario, while also having to deal with rationing as well as trying to provide additional resources where possible. So a lot of strife, a lot of struggle, but hopefully not the end of the world. But if it gets to that point, we probably won't be having these conversations anyway, will we? So It's weird being the same age as old people, says Mike H. I feel similarly, even though I'm not old. It just feels like, you only get older, so it is what it is. Why are we allowing women to have a say in a draft, says MF James? Well, because they're elected officials and they have to have a say if they're going to be elected officials, right? So that's just part of the deal. But they are going to eventually put women in the draft. Don't be fooled by that. They just haven't finished laying the groundwork for it yet. So it'll eventually get there for you. Let's see here. Reliable Prepper, thanks for joining the membership. I really appreciate it. Yardbird says it won't be so bad. We'll just rebuild from the ashes. You know what? It could be our draft, our body, says Florida Sheepdog. It is what it is, It is what it is. We are where we are. And things are just, moving forward in that manner, right? I don't like it. I don't have to like everything. And you know what? I'm a father of daughters, and I don't want to see them be drafted. So there it is. I don't care. Anyway, let's go. Don't forget that Russia has recently said that we're actually their enemy, which was the first time that's ever happened. After months of rising tensions over Ukraine between Russia and the U.S., bilateral relations have hit a new low as the Kremlin spokesperson defined the U.S. as an enemy. Press Secretary to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Peskov, reportedly said, "We are now an enemy country for them, just as they are for us," during a press briefing on Tuesday. The Kremlin had previously referred to the U.S. and Western nations supporting Ukraine as unfriendly states or opponents due to high tensions over Ukraine's use of American-supplied weapons on Russian territory. However, according to Agentstvo, an independent Russian investigative site, this is the first time they have publicly labeled the U.S. an enemy state. Speaking to TRT World, experts said there's actually nothing new here because, publicly stated or not, the United States has long been considered by Russia as its enemy. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, but for them to say it publicly does make a difference, at least in my opinion. So, now, Nick, I appreciate that you think I seem like a cool dude. I appreciate that. Cherokee Survival. Hit the like button. It helps the channel. I agree with that. It does help the channel. And listen, I am going to jump over here to talk about the nuclear sub, because we finally made it there, okay? I know that's what a lot of people are here for. Trust me, we are there. But I do want to say something, okay? I took a break. I went on a vacation, took my family out for a good time because they deserved it, and my kids needed to, have some good childhood memories. And I want to provide them with those before we find ourselves in a scenario where maybe that's not possible anymore, right? Whether or not economically, whether or not because certain places or destinations just no longer exist or go bankrupt or who knows what else, right? So these are things that I wanted to accomplish before I found myself in a scenario where it was too late, right? But here's the thing. While I took this break, it was really intoxicating to separate myself from this preparedness mindset. It was really intoxicating to live the life of like a normie, right? To literally remove yourself from any of the information, remove yourself from the need to prepare, remove yourself from the daily grind of trying to get more things done and trying to get more stuff put away or more stuff set up in the sense of infrastructure in order to be more self-sufficient. That feeling of normalcy bias and not caring was extremely intoxicating, and I can completely understand why people don't prepare, because it was really easy to just let it all go off to the wayside and say, wow, I'm really comfortable, and wow, this is nice to just not, worry about anything, right? Like, I'm not worried about anything. It's all taken care of. I don't have to do a thing. It was really nice. It was intoxicating. I understand why people fall into that trap. But the other part about it that was difficult was battling with whatever is going on right now in the information war. And when I say that, what I mean is that here on YouTube, I don't know if it's me or if it's the context of the channel or if it's just the content that I'm putting out recently, but things have been really bad performance-wise over the last couple of months. Not just like taking a dip, not just, things are slowing down a little bit, but I mean really bad. Like 50% drop in overall performance, which for anything you do, doesn't matter if it's work-related, educationally, if it's something that you're doing in the sense of fitness, right? If you usually run a mile and suddenly you can only run a half mile, that's an extreme drop in performance, and it will have you concerned as to why you suddenly are performing at such a low level compared to where you usually stand. And as somebody who works really hard to try to move forward and progress things, it has me concerned. Now, could I blame possible censorship or things like that here on this platform, not wanting people to be prepared, or maybe some of the subjects I've dived into regarding other groups here in the country who don't necessarily like the way America is right now? That could definitely be part of it, but I don't want to use that excuse. So the best thing I can do is to keep moving forward, keep producing content, keep giving information out like this, and then ask for your help. And when I say that, all I mean is that if you can like these videos, if you can share the videos, and if you can try your best to push things out there, hit the notification bell and all those things, maybe we can get back on track and maybe we can get through whatever algorithmic barrier I'm currently facing is and be back to where things used to be, I guess. But right now, I feel like I'm fighting an uphill battle, and maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm just not doing a good job. So if that's the case, I would literally appreciate any of the feedback you all have or anything you want to let me know about. You can email me at magicprepper@gmail.com. You can go to my website. There's a contact form. Either way, I'm just trying my best to keep things moving forward. And watching a performance hit like that while on a vacation where I suddenly don't have to care about anything and I don't have to actually work hard to prepare or work hard to stay on top of information or try to present any information to anyone else while batched videos were releasing that I had made earlier in the year in order to have ready for that vacation. It made life really, like I said, intoxicating to just sit back and relax and not care anymore. And I'm not saying I don't care about the channel. What I'm saying is it was nice to not care about world events. It was nice to not care about what was happening in our world. And I'm not going to be that way. But all I'm trying to say is that I can understand where those people are coming from. And then I could also understand why people might not be interested in the topics that I talk about here as much as they used to be. So let me know what your thoughts are. But I wanted to just mention that I do need your help. And I'll probably be asking for more of those call to actions in future videos because apparently there's a barrier somewhere. And whatever it is, it's causing a little bit of mental stress on my side because it just makes me feel like I'm doing a bad job. So I appreciate any support I get. I really do. And let's talk about some of the, let's just say, crazier things that are happening right now, like Russian nuclear subs in the Caribbean, okay? And looking at you all, I really appreciate all the words coming in. Thank you so much. I really do. And yeah, I will definitely be looking forward to some of that feedback, 100%. Okay, so let's go for it. Ready? Here we are. Strategic calculations behind Russia's Kazan nuclear submarine's upcoming visit to Cuba. Now, of course, there's been a lot of reports of these subs being tracked off the coast of Florida. We've seen the flight trackers tracking the P-8 Poseidons and everything else over the ocean that are all out there trying to find where these particular subs are. And you can kind of see that if you go on the flight trackers right now. You can actually see some of those different flight paths that show that somebody's looking for something. In fact, there was a Canadian aircraft down there near Florida doing a lot of circles here just recently. So I think there's some reason to believe that we have some activity going on down there. But here's what's going on with that. And this is what you need to understand. And this is also where I think there could be some due speculation that we need to use in order to have a better understanding of like what's happening here, okay? The Yasin M-class Kazan's most notable feature is the capability to launch a range of anti-ship and land attack missiles, okay? This is a very capable submarine. Heralding the days of the tense Cold War, particularly the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Russian nuclear-powered submarine of the Yasin M-class, the Kazan, will visit Havana, Cuba as announced. This comes amid a particular inflection point in the war in Ukraine, where the imminent arrival of large capital weapons like F-16s and the approval by US and Europe for Kiev to strike targets inside mainland Russia. We just talked about this, right? We just talked about Russia's thoughts on us arming them with ways to attack mainland Russia and how they might respond. Now we have a nuclear submarine that's down in Cuba. And of course, this is a nuclear-powered submarine. It does not mean it has nuclear weapons. They're saying it doesn't, but that's just it. They're just saying it doesn't. So be aware of that as well. Even more recently, French President Emmanuel Macron announced the approval to send Mirage 2000-5 fighters to Ukraine after months of holding off on Ukraine's request for more aircraft. While the submarine itself would not be armed with nuclear weapons, the strategic message Moscow appears to be sending is loaded. Primarily, it flows from Vladimir Putin's persistent wielding of the nuclear threat, where he promises the use of atomic weapons if the Russian Federation faces an existential threat. Okay? Kazan and 3 other Russian naval vessels, missile frigate Admiral Gorshkov, fleet replenishment taker Pashin, and salvage tug Nikolai Chiker will dock in the Cuban capital from June 12th to the 17th. Cuba's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in 2 statements on June 6th, 2024, none of the vessels is carrying nuclear weapons, so their stopover in our country does not represent a threat to the region, it added. Now, that's what they're saying. Do they have nuclear weapons? I mean, it's possible they don't. I'm sure there's nuke sniffer planes and everything else out there that could tell us if they did or not. So not having them and then saying they don't have them would be a way to instill some level of false sense of security, I guess, right? But either way, they're saying they don't have them. But I will say that it would be interesting to keep an eye on that region between the 12th and the 17th, because that's when these ships will be stationed in Cuba, which is very close to the United States. Between the Florida Keys and Cuba is only 90 miles. So be aware of that. That is not far at all, especially for a submarine that's whole design is centered around the idea of land attack missiles, okay? The Yasin class are a series of nuclear-powered cruise missile submarines designed by the Malekith Engineering Bureau and built at the Sevmash shipyard, part of the USC. It is the country's only nuclear submarine producer. The sub is based on the Akula class, which were designed to replace the Russian Navy's Soviet-era nuclear attack submarines. While the Akula is optimized for a hunter-killer role, the Yasin class concept is more of a nuclear-guided missile submarine. According to Rusai, the Kazan was constructed in 8 years, less than half the time taken to construct the lead ship of the class, the Severodvinsk. The Kazan's and Severodvinsk's most notable feature is the capability to launch a range of anti-ship and land attack missiles, including in the future the hypersonic 3M22 Zircon. Okay? The shift from SSNs like the Akula, primarily optimized for a hunter-killer role, towards a concept closer to SSGNs is likely indicative of a shift in the way that the Russian submarines will contribute to future campaigns. So this is not just a visit. This is a strategic operation where they're trying to most likely map out their future capabilities based on this new technology that they're using, okay? Now, weapons loadout. I found this to be interesting. Interestingly, the Kazan is equipped with the UKSK 3P-14B vertical launch system consisting of 8 SM-346 modules, having a length of 10 meters and a diameter of 2 meters. They can hold either 5 3M54-1 caliber missiles or 4 P-800 Onyx anti-ship missiles each. The system will also be able to launch the 4,500-kilometer Caliber M missile, which as of 2021 was under development, and a submarine-launched variant of the KH-101. This missile is presently fired by the Tupolev Tu-95 and Tu-160 strategic bombers, with variants capable of releasing decoys and dual warheads already in use in Ukraine. These missiles provide the Yasin and Yasin M with significant long-range land attack and anti-ship capabilities. The Zircon, meanwhile, has a reported speed of Mach 6 to 8. Depending on its flight trajectory, it can potentially overwhelm shipboard air defenses by denying them the time they need to develop a firing solution, Rusai added. Okay. Now, they're also talking about how this seems like a message and it has intent behind it for why they're docking it in Cuba. And of course, it's all about different political relations and the fact that they have these affiliations and these relationships here. We also have China chiming in when it comes to all the different blockades / embargoes going on between the U.S. and Cuba. And it is very much a relationship building exercise while also being a threat. This is a threat to the U.S. mainland. It's to show that we are vulnerable to this type of activity, right? So, talks about how we can have these P-8 Poseidons using intelligence gathering in order to get more information about this particular sub, but also be aware of the fact that Russia's aware of this and that they're placing the sub there to be scanned by said aircraft, which may be a way to provide some level of disinformation or maybe throw off the scent. Who knows, right? But this is why this is so concerning, because not only is there a Russian nuclear sub docking in Havana, Cuba, but we also have one of the newer built better technology submarines that Russia has to offer that is specifically developed for ship-to-ship battles as well as land attacks, long-range land attacks using new missile systems. So, be aware of this. Keep an eye out for it. June 12th to June 17th, this submarine as well as the other naval ships will be docked in Cuba, and we will have Russian warships 90 miles from our mainland, which is very concerning with the current scenario occurring and with the verbiage coming from Russia as well as the U.S. and NATO members regarding our current tensions, okay? Which we're going to talk about more here in just a second. But I did see Harbor Prepper said, as an old military intelligence bubba, I can tell you that you needn't worry about an adversary's ships that you know about and or can see. Worry about the ones you can't. Good call, Harbor Prepper. 100% makes sense to me. And obviously, you can see it. It's being shown to you for a reason. right? And we know that Russia is very staunch when it comes to propaganda and when it comes to psychological war games and things of that nature. So obviously this is providing the public with something to be concerned about regarding Russia. Maybe not the DOD, but maybe they have other concerns that we, of course, don't know about, right? So these are all things to keep in mind. Thanks for sending that message. Northern Girl Hobbies, thank you for being here. Thank you for modding. Always appreciate you. Of course, MP proceeds to make me look like an idiot, says Luke B. I don't know how I did that, but I still appreciate you. So I still am glad you're here, and I don't mean to ever make anyone look like an idiot because I do it for myself quite enough. And here, just to share a new one with everyone, I know we talk about it a lot. Everyone wants to know, like, do you dye your hair? I don't dye my hair. I know we have to talk about this all the time. But the newest one that I found to be very funny is that my hair is fake now. Now I actually wear a wig. So not only do I dye my hair, but I also wear a wig because, according to this person, no one's hair on the side of their head is this thick. There's no possible way your hair can be this thick on the side of your head. Therefore, it's a wig. Therefore, it's fake. So now my hair is clearly fake. It's not real, just like birds. So here we are. I'm doing the best I can here, man. I'm killing it with the wigs. Could be the Russians are on a rum run. I think so, Porky Prepper. I know they love rum, and we like their vodka, so maybe it's a trade-off. I'm not sure. So all this is happening, and guess what just happened? Well, Ukraine used Western weapons to hurt a bunch of stuff in Russia. This is where the escalations keep going. This is why this is a wartime update live stream. This is why I'm trying to provide you this information, because this is a wartime, and these things keep happening, and we're going to see more of it. So let's keep going, but this is an update from the Ukraine-Russian war. Ukraine has claimed it damaged 3 Russian surface-to-air defense systems overnight in missile attacks on occupied Crimea. When did this come out? Today. So this is from last night, right? So all the things that we're talking about regarding escalations between Russia and NATO keep happening. Like, they're not slowing down. The words that are being used out of Russia aren't being heeded. What we're doing isn't stopping or slowing down. So you have to assume from a preparedness mindset that this thing is going to keep moving forward. And forward is bad in the sense of not wanting to be in a global conflict. So here we are. Ukraine has claimed it damaged 3 Russian surface-to-air defense systems overnight in missile attacks on occupied Crimea. 1 S-400 anti-aircraft missile unit was hit near Dzhankoy, and 2 more S-300 anti-aircraft missile units were attacked near occupied Koronasmusk and Yevpatoria. Ukraine's military said, look, I don't read words good sometimes in other languages. Welcome to real life. Okay, it comes as Kiev said it also destroyed a Russian Su-57 plane, a twin-engine stealth fighter worth up to 28 million pounds, around 370 miles from the front line. I think that's pounds. That's the pound symbol, right? It's not a euro symbol. Is it? I don't know. Who cares? It's not real money anyway. The strike, believed to have been conducted using drones, comes after Ukraine's Western allies permitted Kiev to use their weapons for limited strikes inside Russia. Earlier, U.S. President Joe Biden said Vladimir Putin was not going to stop with the war in Ukraine, pledging to support Europe against Russia. Mr. Biden said the whole of Europe was threatened by the Russian president. The U.S. president met his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, in Paris, and the two pledged solidarity on the wars raging in Europe and the Middle East. As you know, France has also just dissolved their parliament, basically. So they are in a weird situation because Macron didn't like that the far-right party just won in the European Union election. So they're rolling the dice over there. We'll see how that turns out for them. I have a feeling they might have some inside knowledge. I don't know. It seems to work out that way quite a bit, doesn't it? But what else is France doing? Because who really cares about their politics? Because, you know, it's France, right? They're just going to be French no matter what happens. Macron says France working to finalize plan to send troops to Ukraine. This shouldn't backfire at all. The French leader says other NATO countries have agreed to send troops to train Ukrainian forces. This is from today. These things are happening now. This is not from a month ago. This is not from 2 months ago. This is from today. On Friday, French President Emmanuel Macron said France was working to finalize a coalition of NATO countries that are willing to send troops to Ukraine to train Ukrainian forces, a step that would mark a huge escalation in the proxy war. During a press conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Paris, Macron said Ukraine's request for NATO trainers was legitimate and downplayed the risk of escalation. Because why would they tell you it's going to escalate things. That wouldn't work out well for stock markets or for money bubbles of any kind. It's much more efficient and practical for certain capacities and certain conditions to train on Ukrainian soil. It's a legitimate request, Macron said. We're going to use the coming days to finalize the broadest possible coalition. He added that several NATO countries have already agreed to the plan. Moscow has said that any French trainers deployed to Ukraine would be legitimate targets of the Russian military, but Macron dismissed the warning. This is not deploying European soldiers on the front line. It is recognizing the sovereignty of Ukraine over its territory, he said. Who would we be to give in to the invocations or threats of Russia? Okay. Now, why did he have to say that? Because this is what Russia said, in case you weren't aware. Any French military in Ukraine would be a legitimate target for Russian forces, Lavrov says. Any French military instructors in Ukraine would be a legitimate target for Russian armed forces, Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov said Tuesday during a tour of Africa, where frustration with the West has swayed several countries toward Moscow. Lavrov made the remarks at joint news conference with the Republic of Congo's foreign minister Jean-Claude Gakasso. As for the French instructors, I think they are already on the Ukrainian territory, Lavrov said, referring to the military instructors that France could send to train Ukrainian troops. Regardless of their status, military officials or mercenaries represent a legitimate target for our armed forces. So, France is putting troops there. They're going to get other NATO troops involved as well, and Russia is telling them they're legitimate targets. So, I would expect at any point in time to see French troops be taken out by Russian strikes. And then that to be used as a war cry or a rallying cry for more involvement. Unfortunately, some of these trainers are being sent to the meat grinder, basically, in order to become martyrs, or at least that's my opinion as to how it looks. And then they're going to use that incident as a way to generate additional support and morale for entering the war in more of a conventional way, right? So, Just Jay, France, what could go wrong? Well, I don't know. It sounds like a lot could go wrong, okay? Robert Larson says only one man would give me the raspberry, and that's true. And it's Lone Star. Now, we also have something else interesting to talk about tonight. How many of you like ammunition? Probably a lot, right? How many of you are worried about ammunition shortages? Well, we've been through quite a few of them now, haven't we? And it seems like there's always a reason to be concerned about the next one. Well, this next one is problematic, especially if things really, move forward between us, Russia, and even China. So what am I talking about? Well, let's look into it. The Kremlin says U.S. is blackmailing China by threatening sanctions over exports to Russia. Why? Well, why would this be happening? The Kremlin on Wednesday described comments by U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen that Washington would not tolerate China increasing its exports of dual-use goods to Russia and would respond with sanctions as blackmail. Dual-use goods. Okay. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that Washington's tone was completely unacceptable and that Moscow stood in solidarity with Beijing. Wow, I wonder if these two adversaries could possibly team up against us at any point in time. We are well aware that our Chinese comrades do not accept such language, do not accept such messages and such threats, such blackmail, Peskov told reporters. What are these dual-use goods? The United States says that by providing dual-use goods, which have both civilian and military applications, China is powering Russia's war effort in Ukraine. China is the top supplier of machine tools, microelectronics, nitrocellulose, which is critical to making munitions and rocket propellants, and other dual-use items that Moscow is using to ramp up its defense industrial base, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said during a visit to Beijing in April. Now, if we sanction China over exporting nitrocellulose to Russia, do you think they will gladly sell it to us? Do you think they'll keep exporting it to us as well? Do you think that could cause any problems when it comes to our supply of gunpowder or munitions? I don't know. But what I can say is that there's a couple of things to consider when it comes to that exact scenario. Okay? Now, this article is from April, but it's relevant to what we're talking about right now, so I'm using it to build context. China is a threat to Europe's gunpowder supply, defense boss warns. Europe is too reliant on China to make powder for ammunition and risks a supply crisis that could threaten the continent's security, one of the EU's most important defense contractors warned. In an interview with Politico, Saab CEO Michael Johansson called on governments to cut environmental rules to make it easier for companies to diversify their supply chains for critical military components. Beijing plays a key role in supplying EU countries with raw materials they need for their defense industries, even though China is also providing vital support to Vladimir Putin's war machine in Ukraine. When it comes to the supply of ingredients for gunpowder, the propellant used to fire out shells, Western defense firms should look to diversify their sources, said Johansson. While lead times and prices for some components have improved, Johansson told Politico that European defense industry still faced bottlenecks, especially on powder and nitrocellulose to create powder. The risk of China sort of disconnecting the deliveries of nitrocellulose to do powder in Europe would be detrimental. Since the war in Ukraine started, Europe's defense companies have been under pressure to produce more weapons and ammunition faster, both to support Kiev and to bolster domestic defense. As Ukraine is increasingly outgunned by Russia, the failure of the West to send enough ammunition to Kiev is already shaping the war's outcome. Now, by the beginning of 2026, the European Commission reckons the bloc will be producing 2 million shells a year, but one of the main bottlenecks to faster production is the shortage of propellant and explosive powder. All right. Well, keep in mind that that is well known by the BRICS nations, which, in case you weren't aware, is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is an article from BRICS. Like, this is the BRICS website. This is something that you need to be aware of. China can shut this down at any point. And even as individual Americans here in the country where we actually get to enjoy our Second Amendment rights to a degree, right? Because, not to the fullest that they should be. Well, we are affected by this just as much as the military. U.S. defense industry struggles to manufacture basic artillery for Ukraine. This is an article BRICS put out themselves today. The United States arms industry is not producing the basic ammunition required to sustain support for Ukraine and Israel, Bloomberg reported on June 8th. This is an extraordinary situation since Russia's armed industry is booming despite facing major Western sanctions, okay? Now, a lot of this is just the typical stuff, but they do go on to talk about actual gunpowder being the issue, okay? And I'm trying to find where that is here again because it's been a minute. And where are you, gunpowder? Well, we're going to do it the easy way. Ready? Boom. Okay. According to the outlet, the U.S. defense industry gave priority to the manufacture of high-tech ammunition and halted the production of basic artillery, such as 155mm ammunition, the most used in the wars that are being fought today. The U.S. is also facing a shortage of basic products, such as gunpowder or trinitrotoluene, TNT, to produce these munitions and have had to turn to other countries, such as Poland and Turkey, to obtain supplies. Since the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, the Pentagon has divested or neglected facilities once used to manufacture everything from projectiles to gunpowder, focusing instead on transforming warfare with high-tech weaponry. What's left is crumbling infrastructure, outdated machinery, and a tiny workforce that can't keep up with growing international demand. So, keep that in mind. The nitrocellulose shortage is a big deal, and China can turn off the faucet at any point that they want to, especially if we sanction them for exporting that same exact product to Russia. So if that happens, you have to assume we're going to lose a large supplier of nitrocellulose, and China is one of the largest in the world. So it can affect everything, not just personal ammunition consumption, but it can also affect what our defense capability is. It can affect our military capability, and it can affect a lot of things, okay? Now, I did want to talk about this because we are getting towards that hour mark, and this is what was brought up earlier by Nick, okay? How Bitcoin will benefit from the end of the U.S.-Saudi petrodollar deal. Okay, so now if you weren't aware, on June 9th, Saudi Arabia did not renew their deal with the petrodollar to be the exclusive way that they did business when it came to oil. So now they have the flexibility to do business in other currencies, which means that the United States dollar is likely to lose its standing on the world stage when it comes to valuation and everything else regarding currency exchange. This is very problematic for our economy. This is something that we have floated on over the last 50 years when it comes to the US dollar being the premier way of spending throughout the world, and it's problematic. So Now, I'm not saying that Bitcoin will benefit from this per se, but I just thought this article was interesting when it came to this particular situation, okay? Bitcoin stands to benefit from the end of the US-Saudi petrodollar deal. Moreover, the financial world is poised for a seismic shift following Saudi Arabia's decision not to renew its long-standing security agreement within the United States, which expired on June 9th. This pivotal move allows Saudi Arabia to sell oil and other goods in various currencies. These include the Chinese RMB, euros, yen, and yuan, rather than exclusively in US dollars. In addition, the use of digital currencies like Bitcoin could also be explored. The latest development marks a significant departure from the petrodollar system established in 1972, when the U.S. decoupled its currency from gold. In addition, the decision is expected to accelerate the global trend of moving away from the U.S. dollar, with Bitcoin standing to gain significantly from this change. Saudi Arabia has announced its participation in the China-dominated central bank digital currency cross-border trial, Project mBridge. The move underscores its commitment to diversifying its economic dependencies. The Bank for International Settlements announced Saudi Arabia's full participation in Project mBridge. The project includes central banks from China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. According to Reuters, Josh Lipsky from the Atlantic Council noted the most advanced cross-border CBDC project just added a major G20 economy and the largest oil exporter in the world. Central bank digital currency, anybody? Do you think that there's a good chance we'll jump on top of that if it is backed by oil and backed by Saudi Arabia and becomes more lucrative than the US dollar? These are things to consider, and especially imagine implementing a US-style central bank digital currency when it's not our fault, right? When it's not the government's choice. Look, we didn't want to have to do this, but Saudi Arabia didn't renew our deal. Now they're not using the dollar. Now they're using the CBDC, and if we use the CBDC, it'll make us rich again because the economy will benefit from it. There's a lot of things that we might benefit from by transitioning over to this, so it's something that you guys should consider being a good thing, and it's not our fault, right? This is just how I look at things. Let's see here. In 2019, Reuters did an article about Saudi Arabia threatening to do this if NOPEC legislation went through, said Osbin Holistic. And you know what? That's good that you go back in time and remember things that have occurred in history and look at these articles, because this is how you build a portfolio of data that allows you to make better assumptions for things that can happen in the future. And clearly you've been doing your homework, so that's amazing. Now, I don't know where all this is going. I can't predict the future. But what I can do is say that things are clearly heading in a negative direction, right? When it comes to the global relationship between countries and between economies, things are obviously becoming more caustic. And the probability of conventional warfare breaking out is only growing. So, in that sense, please do what you can to keep preparing. And please focus on things that matter and keeping an eye on the basics, right? You need to have ways to generate power. You need to have ways to generate food. You need to have ways to access water. And you need to have ways to maintain those systems, right? And so do what you can. Don't feel like you can't accomplish those goals based on your current location or your vicinity to large population centers or whatever it might be. There are ways to do things. They might not be on as large of a scale. They might not be as productive as having, a farm or whatever it might be, but there are some things you can do to mitigate your reliance on these grid systems, and any little bit you do could help you get through an emergency scenario and hopefully find yourself on the other side of it unscathed, because that's really the goal here. I don't want to live in an apocalyptic landscape for the rest of my life, right? If something bad happens to the point where we have to rely on our systems, the goal then needs to be how we're going to rebuild and build community in order to gain back that semblance of normalcy afterward, right? And so that's what we should be working on, not just to survive these apocalyptic scenarios, but to rebuild thereafter and to have some form of quality of life for our families, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. So hopefully that's what we're all working on together. If you want to be in the private live stream tonight, make sure you either do one of two things. You can join the channel membership. The join button below will allow you to do that. And then that live stream is posted on my community tab on the channel page. Or you can join Subscribestar, which is $5 a month. I just threw it in the live chat. I try to do more content there. I am working on establishing some more consistent concepts over there on that platform. So be aware of that. There are some things that I'm going to be playing with and experimenting with here moving forward in the future, just based on some of these, like I said, almost necessary changes that could exist based on the hurdles that are being placed in front of me right now regarding channel performance, which we all just talked about. But if you need anything from me at all, do not feel like you have to sign up for a membership of any kind. I'm here. You can access me through my website. I don't get back to everyone because I get over inundated with messages, but I do try my best to communicate when I can. And I do want you to understand that I don't hide information that's relevant to your preparedness behind a paywall. Everything else is just more casual, conversational, and maybe like more personal, but not necessary for your information, right? So anything else you guys need from me, go to magicprepper.com. Don't forget, magicprepper.com is also where you can get that German document on how they're preparing for war and how they're going to handle their population and what they're going to place upon their citizenry when it comes to requirements. So it might be something good to look at because we all know the West likes to emulate itself, right? So it's not very far-fetched to assume that countries like the United States might do something similar, right? Maybe not the same, but probably similar. So I would definitely check that out, and I have it posted there for you at magicprepper.com. And yeah, besides that, it's going to be it for Magic Prepper.